Princess Zira stood at the grand hall of the alien palace, surrounded by towering figures. The males of her species, strong and imposing, glared down at her with an air of superiority. She was small, delicate, and fragile compared to them. Her heart sank as yet another male rejected her, his voice cold and dismissive. "You're too weak to be of any value to the Empire, Princess. You'll never bear the strength needed to lead our people." Zira's mind raced as she felt the sting of the rejection, a feeling she had grown all too familiar with. Her people were known for their size, power, and warlike nature. The taller and stronger males were the ones who held authority, the ones who had the privilege of being courted. But she was considered too small, too insignificant, and, worst of all, unfit to lead. Her father, the Emperor, had pushed her to find a mate for years. He had insisted that her marriage would determine the future of their empire, but with each rejection, Zira felt the weight of her father's disappointment grow heavier. She had always been overlooked, not because of her intelligence or leadership skills, but because of her size. She was not tall, not powerful like the others. She was tiny. As Zira walked away from the latest suitor, her heart sank deeper. The halls echoed with the laughter of the other royal men as they mocked her. "The princess is too weak to handle a real warrior," one whispered. "How can she lead an empire if she can't even find a mate?" Their cruel words stung, and Zira could feel the tears threatening to spill, but she forced them back. Crying wouldn't make her any stronger. In the middle of her despair, the palace doors opened. Zira turned and saw a new figure enter the room, a human. She froze, for humans were rare on her world, and they were considered far beneath the alien species. The human was a soldier, dressed in battle-worn armor. His face was strong, unyielding, and his eyes locked with hers immediately. This human, what was he doing here? Zira thought. The human didn't look at her as though she were a weakling. He didn't scoff or mock her, but rather, his gaze held a quiet respect. He seemed to see something in her that no one else did. As the human stepped forward, the other alien males snickered. What would this tiny human know about strength? They thought. The alien men, with their massive frames and sharp features, couldn't comprehend why someone so small, so different, could command any respect from the human. The human's name, as she would soon learn, was Captain Jason Walker, a soldier who had come as part of a peace mission between their worlds. His reputation as a warrior had preceded him, but it was his reputation for empathy and understanding that set him apart. He had faced countless battles, but it was his ability to understand different cultures that had earned him his place in the mission. And when he looked at Zira, he didn't see a weak, fragile princess. He saw a leader in the making. "I hear they've rejected you," Jason said softly, his voice not filled with pity, but with something else, something like hope. Zira felt the strangest sensation. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever truly seen her before. The men of her own species had judged her based solely on her size, but Jason saw something more. She stared at him, at the human who seemed so out of place in this grand palace of alien strength and technology. He wasn't large like the others, not powerful in the way they expected, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made Zira wonder if she had been looking at the wrong things all along. Jason leaned in closer. "I don't care about your size, Princess. I see your strength in your eyes. You're more than just what others think you are. You don't have to be like them." Zira's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, someone had seen her for who she truly was, not for her height or her physical strength, but for the fire in her heart, the sharpness of her mind, the leadership she was capable of. It wasn't just that Jason was different from the alien males who had rejected her. It was that he didn't see her as weak. He saw her as strong in ways that were more important than power and size. For a moment, Zira allowed herself to believe that maybe there was hope after all. Maybe she wasn't destined to be overlooked forever. Maybe, just maybe, the human soldier would be the one to change everything. But how could this human, with his limited technology and strength, possibly help her in a world where only power mattered? Little did Zira know, this chance meeting with Jason would set off a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of her empire, and in the process, teach both her people and the humans what true strength really meant. As the days passed, Zira found herself drawn to Captain Jason Walker. Despite the tension between their races, there was something about him that made her feel seen. He wasn't like the others who treated her as a mere pawn in the game of political alliances. Jason saw beyond her small stature. He saw her mind, her spirit, her potential. For the first time in her life, Zira felt as if someone truly understood her. The two of them began to spend more time together, talking in quiet corners of the palace, away from the prying eyes of the royal court. Jason would ask her about her people, their culture, and their history, and Zira would listen with rapt attention as he shared stories of Earth, stories of humans overcoming adversity with grit and determination. There was something both comforting and humbling about his tales. Jason didn't see humans as superior, nor did he pity anyone. He simply believed in the power of individuals, in their ability to rise above circumstances. One evening, as they walked through the palace gardens, Jason turned to her with a rare sincerity in his eyes. "You don't need to be like them, Zira. You don't need to be bigger, stronger, or more violent to make a difference. Your mind, your compassion, that's what matters." Zira's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the first time someone had told her she was capable, but hearing it from Jason felt different. He wasn't offering empty praise. He had spent enough time in battles and wars to know that true strength came from within, not from mere physical power. They continued their walks, often lost in conversation about their worlds and their dreams. Despite the political tension surrounding them, Zira started to feel a sense of peace whenever she was with Jason. She found herself smiling more, feeling lighter than she had in years. In his company, she felt that her dreams were not as impossible as they seemed. Perhaps there was more to her than what her people thought. Perhaps she could lead, even in her own way. However, their growing connection did not go unnoticed. The whispers among the palace guards grew louder. The alien males, whose pride was bruised by the idea of a human soldier being close to their princess, began to plot against Jason. The thought of a human stepping into their world, challenging their beliefs about power and dominance, was intolerable to them. They couldn't accept that someone from a weaker species was gaining the trust of their princess. To them, it was an insult, a threat to their very identity. Zira's father, the emperor, grew increasingly concerned. He had always been a man of tradition and pride, and the idea of his daughter choosing the human over an alien male was unthinkable. He warned her repeatedly that she was jeopardizing not only her future but the stability of their empire. "Zira," he would say, "you must choose a mate from your own kind. This human, this soldier, he has no place in our world. If you continue this, you will bring shame upon us all." Zira, torn between the love and respect she had for her father and the growing bond with Jason, found herself at a crossroads. She had been raised to believe that her people's traditions were unchangeable, that power was everything. Yet, Jason had shown her a different side of strength, a strength that came from the heart, from connection and understanding. She had never felt this way before, but she couldn't deny the way Jason made her feel. In his eyes, she wasn't just a small princess to be discarded. She was important, worthy of respect, worthy of love. Despite the mounting pressure, Zira refused to back down. She could feel the weight of the empire's expectations pressing on her, but she also felt a spark of something deeper. Maybe it was time to change things, she thought. Maybe it was time for her to choose a different path, one that wasn't defined by size or power, but by something more meaningful. One night, while the stars shone brightly over the palace, Jason stood before her with a question that would change everything. "Zira, I've seen the strength in you. I've seen the fire in your heart. You don't have to follow the rules of your people. You can write your own story." His words struck her deeply, and for the first time, Zyra felt something stir within her that she had never felt before, the possibility of true freedom. The freedom to choose her own destiny, to step out from the shadow of tradition, and carve a path that was uniquely hers. But as the days passed, Zyra knew there would be consequences for defying her people's expectations. The alien males had already started to plot against Jason, and she could sense the growing tension between their worlds. It wouldn't be long before her father demanded that she choose, either remain loyal to her people or follow her heart and be with Jason. Yet, the more she thought about it, the more certain she became. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a new way forward, for a future where strength wasn't just about power, but about standing up for what was right. With Jason by her side, she could break free from the chains of tradition and build something better. The connection between them had become undeniable, and Zyra knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was ready to face whatever came next, even if it meant going against the empire that had once been her world. The days that followed only intensified the tension between Zyra and the empire. Despite her growing closeness to Captain Jason, her world seemed to be falling apart. The whispers among the royal court grew louder, and the once innocent stares from the other males of her species turned to glares of contempt. They couldn't accept that their princess, their future queen, was spending time with a human. Worse, they couldn't tolerate that she seemed to trust him more than them. For centuries, the alien species had prided themselves on their physical power and dominance. They had never once had to question their strength. Until now. Zyra knew the stakes. Every conversation with Jason, every moment they shared, seemed to spark a new firestorm in the palace. Her father, the emperor, became increasingly irritable and worried. He had always valued tradition and strength, and the idea of his daughter choosing the human over an alien male was a personal insult. His disappointment in Zyra grew, and with it, his determination to protect his empire's reputation. One afternoon, while Zyra walked through the gardens with Jason, the weight of the situation became even clearer. They were speaking quietly, enjoying the rare peace they found in each other's company, when a loud voice shattered the calm. The emperor's trusted advisor, a stern-faced male named Varric, approached them with fury in his eyes. He had clearly overheard part of their conversation. "Princess Zyra," Varric began coldly, "you are making a grave mistake. Do you not understand the consequences of your actions? The Empire will not stand for your infatuation with this human. You are a royal. You are meant to lead with strength, with the respect of your people. If you continue down this path, you will destroy everything your father has worked for." Zyra felt a deep pang in her chest. She had always admired Varric for his wisdom, but now his words felt like daggers. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to Jason, who had stepped forward protectively. His expression was calm, but his eyes showed the flicker of anger that simmered beneath the surface. "This is none of your concern," Jason said, his voice firm but measured. "Zyra is her own person, and she has the right to choose her own path." Varric scoffed, clearly insulted. "She is a princess, a leader. She does not have the luxury of making such choices. If she continues to associate with you, she will risk everything. The Empire, the future of her people. You are nothing more than a distraction, a human who does not understand the weight of her position." Zyra's heart ached as she watched the two men face off. Her world was slipping further from her grasp, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on her. She had been raised to believe that her duty was to her people, to her father, and to the Empire. But the more she spent time with Jason, the more she realized that she didn't want to follow a life of traditions that didn't feel true to who she was. The more she thought about it, the more she felt she had to make a choice, one that would change everything. But as the days wore on, the tension between the alien species and humans grew. Rumors spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before the Emperor himself summoned Zyra to his private chambers. His anger was palpable as he stood before her, his tall figure towering over her small frame. He had always been a man of great authority, a man who demanded loyalty and respect, but now his voice shook with frustration. "You have crossed a line, Zeret," he said, his voice low but dangerous. "You have chosen a human over your own kind. Do you realize what this means? The others in the council will not tolerate this. They will not allow a human to have any place in our world. If you continue this foolishness, you will lose everything. Your place as heir, your future as queen, and everything I've worked to build." Zyra's heart broke as she listened to her father. She had always known that her people's expectations weighed heavily on her shoulders, but hearing it from her father, the very person who had raised her to follow these traditions, felt like a betrayal. She wanted to speak, to argue, to tell him that she had a right to choose, that her value wasn't in her size or in the approval of others. But she couldn't find the words. The pressure of her father's disappointment pressed down on her like a weight, suffocating her. As the Emperor continued to speak, Zyra's mind wandered. She couldn't help but think of Jason. He had never once asked her to choose between him and her people. He hadn't pressured her to make any decisions. He had simply been there for her, quietly supporting her when no one else would. He didn't care about her title or her status. He cared about her, and that made all the difference. But even as she found strength in her feelings for Jason, Zyra knew that the situation was spiraling out of control. The alien males who had rejected her before were now speaking openly about the shame she had brought upon her family. The whispers became louder, more hostile. Jason's presence was seen as an insult to their very way of life. Zyra's world was rapidly becoming divided, a war between loyalty to her people and loyalty to her own heart. The tension was thick, suffocating, and Zyra knew it wouldn't be long before her choices would lead to even greater consequences. The peace she had found in Jason's presence was quickly turning into a battlefield, and Zyra had no idea how much longer she could hold on to both worlds. In the midst of all this, one thing was certain. Zyra's life would never be the same. Zyra's life took a dark turn that night. The tension had been rising for weeks, but nothing could have prepared her for the storm that was about to hit. Despite her father's warnings, despite the glares of the alien males, she had continued to meet with Jason in secret. Each moment with him felt like a breath of fresh air, a reprieve from the suffocating expectations of her people. But the peace she found in Jason's company was fragile, and it would not last much longer. It all started when Zyra received an urgent summons from her father. His voice, always steady and commanding, was now strained with anger. "Zyra, you have made your choice," he said, his words cold as ice. "You've chosen a human over your own people. I cannot allow this to continue. You will face the consequences for your actions." Before she could even respond, two of the Emperor's trusted soldiers entered her chambers, their faces hard and unyielding. Without a word, they grabbed her by the arms, pulling her away from the only place that had ever felt like home. Zyra fought back, but her small frame was no match for the strength of the soldiers. As they dragged her through the hallways of the palace, she could hear the whispers growing louder. The courtiers, the nobles, even the guards, all turned to watch her as she was escorted away in chains. Her heart pounded in her chest. She knew what this meant. It wasn't just about disobeying her father. It was about defying everything her people believed in. The alien males had never accepted her choice, and now they had found a way to act. Zyra had become a threat to their pride, and they would stop at nothing to remove her. They threw her into a cold, dark cell, the walls closing in on her like a tomb. The sound of the heavy doors slamming shut echoed in her ears. She sank to the floor, tears blurring her vision. Betrayal. That was the only word that could describe what she felt in that moment. Her father, the one person who had always stood by her, had turned his back on her. He had chosen the Empire's traditions over his daughter's happiness. Zyra knew the consequences of her actions. She had known from the start that her feelings for Jason would come at a great cost. But she had never imagined it would come to this: imprisonment, rejection, and betrayal by her own blood. The pain of it all was too much to bear. For hours, Zyra sat in the darkness, her mind racing. She tried to think of a way out, a way to escape this nightmare, but nothing seemed possible. Her father's betrayal cut deep, but the thought of Jason kept her going. She knew he would never leave her, that he would never turn his back on her. She had to hold on for him. She had to believe that there was still a way out of this. Meanwhile, Jason was frantically searching for a way to reach her. The news of Zira's imprisonment had spread quickly, and the humans who had fought alongside him on the battlefield were rallying to his side. They couldn't allow the princess to be abandoned, to be left to rot in a cold cell. Jason knew the risks, but he also knew that he couldn't let Zira face this alone. He couldn't let her be a victim of the same empire that had cast her aside for being different. He made his way to the palace, cloaked in the shadows, careful to avoid the patrols. His heart raced as he neared the palace gates. He knew this was dangerous, but Zira's life was at stake. No matter the cost, he would free her. Inside the cell, Zira could hear footsteps approaching. She stood up quickly, wiping away the tears that had stained her cheeks. She wasn't sure what to expect, but when the door to her cell opened, she was met with the last person she had hoped to see. Her father. The Emperor stood in the doorway, his face hard and unyielding. "Zira," he said, his voice filled with authority, "you have brought shame upon yourself, upon this empire. You were meant to lead, but you've chosen a human. You've chosen weakness." Zira's heart sank. "Father, please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm not weak. I love him." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "You do not know what love is. You are blinded by your emotions, by the foolishness of your heart. Jason is nothing more than a distraction. He is not a part of our world, and he never will be." Zira shook her head. "No, father. He's more than that. He's shown me a world I never knew existed. A world where strength doesn't come from power or fear, but from love, from connection. He's not weak, and neither am I." The Emperor's face twisted with rage. "You are weak, Zira. You've proven it by rejecting everything that makes you who you are. You will remain here until you learn your lesson, until you understand the cost of defying the Empire." He turned and walked away, leaving Zira alone once more. Her heart felt heavier than ever. She could feel the walls closing in around her, suffocating her in a world she didn't belong to anymore. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. In the darkness, a voice whispered her name. "Zira." Her breath caught in her throat. It was Jason. She rushed to the bars of the cell, her heart pounding. "Jason, how did you find me?" "I'll always find you," Jason said, his voice filled with determination. "You're not alone. I'm not leaving you." Zira's eyes filled with tears. For the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. Jason was here. He was fighting for her. And together, they would find a way to break free. Zira's heart raced as she pressed her hand against the cold bars of the prison cell. Jason's voice echoed through the dimly lit corridors, but she could barely believe he was really there. After everything that had happened, after her father's betrayal and a cruel rejection from her people, Jason was here, for her. She barely had time to collect her thoughts before Jason's face appeared in the narrow window of the cell. His expression was a mixture of determination and relief. "I told you I wouldn't leave you," he whispered, his eyes locking onto hers. "We're getting out of here." Tears sprang to Zira's eyes as she stepped closer to the bars. "But how? My father won't let me go. He wants me to stay here. He says I'm a disgrace." Jason's jaw clenched, his fingers tightening around the edge of the window. "Your father is wrong, Zira. You're not a disgrace. You're a fighter. And I'm not going to let them keep you locked away in here. I won't let anyone take you away from me." Her heart fluttered as she heard the resolve in his voice. This wasn't just a rescue mission for him. It was personal. He was willing to risk everything for her, and that meant more than anything. She could feel the weight of her father's betrayal, but she also felt the warmth of Jason's unwavering loyalty. Zira knew she couldn't stay here. She couldn't let the Empire define her future. Not when Jason had shown her a world of freedom, of love, and of true strength. There had to be a way out. As if reading her thoughts, Jason stepped back from the window and vanished into the shadows. Zyra didn't know what he was planning, but she trusted him. She had to. It was her only hope. The minutes felt like hours as she paced the cold, damp floor of the cell. She could hear the distant footsteps of the guards patrolling the hallways, but nothing could distract her from the sound of Jason's promise, the promise that he would find a way to get her out. Finally, she heard the soft hiss of the door to her cell sliding open. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing in the doorway, was Jason, his face flushed with adrenaline and excitement. Behind him, a small group of human soldiers stood at the ready, their eyes focused and determined. "Zyra, we're getting you out of here," Jason said, his voice low but urgent. "Follow me, and stay close." She didn't hesitate. The moment she saw Jason, she knew she had to move fast. Without looking back, she stepped out of the cell, her heart pounding in her chest. The human soldiers took up positions along the hallway, watching for any sign of movement from the alien guards. The palace was vast, its hallways stretching endlessly in every direction. The familiar stone walls, which had once felt like home, now seemed like a maze. Zyra followed Jason through the twisting corridors, her mind racing with fear and excitement. The sounds of guards, shouting and weapons clanging echoed from all directions. They were getting closer. The alarm had been raised. Jason turned a corner and led them into a smaller, hidden hallway. "This way," he whispered, his eyes scanning the shadows. They moved quickly, staying low and quiet. Zyra could feel the tension in the air, the weight of what they were about to do. Her father would be furious. The entire empire would be after them. But Zyra wasn't afraid anymore. She had Jason, and that was all that mattered. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind them, followed by the harsh voices of alien soldiers. They were getting closer. Zyra's pulse quickened as she turned to Jason. "What now?" "We fight," Jason said, his voice steady. "Stay close. Don't let them get to us." Before Zyra could respond, the first wave of alien soldiers rounded the corner, their weapons raised. The human soldiers opened fire without hesitation, their weapons glowing with bright, deadly energy. Zyra flinched as the blasts tore through the air, but she stayed close to Jason, watching as the soldiers fought with everything they had. The alien soldiers were strong, but the humans were faster. They knew how to move in the shadows, how to strike quickly and decisively. The two sides clashed in a blur of gunfire and energy blasts, the sound of battle filling the air. Zyra's heart raced as she watched Jason, her protector, leading the charge with unyielding courage. "Stay down," Jason shouted as an alien soldier aimed a weapon at Zyra. He threw himself in front of her, taking the hit and knocking the soldier to the ground with a well-placed strike. Zyra gasped, her heart in her throat. "Jason." "I'm fine," he said, gritting his teeth as he pulled himself up. "Keep moving. We have to reach the escape ship." The fight raged on, but the human soldiers were gaining the upper hand. With every step they took, they pushed the aliens back. The hallways were littered with fallen soldiers, both alien and human, but they couldn't stop now. Zyra could see the escape ship in the distance, its engines humming as it prepared to take off. They were almost there. Just as they reached the final corridor, Zyra heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind them. She turned to see her father, flanked by a group of elite guards, charging toward them. "Zyra," the Emperor shouted, his voice full of fury. "You've betrayed everything. You've chosen this human over your own people." Zyra stood her ground, her eyes locked onto her father's furious gaze. "No, father. I've chosen freedom. I've chosen love, and you can't take that away from me." With a final surge of energy, Jason and the human soldiers charged forward, overpowering the Emperor's guards. Zyra and Jason reached the ship just as the last of the enemies fell. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off into the sky. Zara looked out the window at the palace, now a fading memory. She wasn't just running away. She was stepping into a future where she could choose her own path. Jason turned to her, a smile on his face. "It's just us now. Together." Zara nodded, her heart full of hope. Together. The escape ship soared through the stars, leaving the once majestic palace far behind. Zara looked out the window, her heart pounding with both relief and excitement. She couldn't believe they had done it. After everything she had been through, after all the rejection, betrayal, and battles, she was finally free. Free to live her life, free to choose her own path, with Jason by her side. Jason stood beside her, his eyes fixed on the vast expanse of space. "We did it," he said, his voice low but filled with triumph. "You're free now, Zara. No one can tell you what to do anymore." Zara turned to him, her face softening as she smiled. "I never thought this day would come, but I couldn't have done it without you. You risked everything to save me." Jason shrugged, his expression modest, but filled with pride. "I didn't risk everything. I just did what anyone would do for someone they love." Her heart fluttered at his words. She had always known that Jason cared for her, but hearing it out loud was something entirely different. They had fought through so much together. The rejection, the imprisonment, the battle against her own people. And now, they were escaping to a new future, together. The escape ship hummed as it moved through the stars, heading toward an unknown destination. Zara didn't care where they were going, as long as she was with Jason. They had no plans, no clear destination. They were simply going to follow the stars, follow their hearts, and see where life took them. But even in the silence of their newfound freedom, Zara couldn't shake the thought of her father. She hadn't seen him since the final battle, when she had left the palace behind. She had heard that the emperor had been captured and would face trial for his actions, but Zara couldn't find it in herself to feel anything but sadness. Her father had once been her hero, the one who had raised her, taught her, and guided her. But he had rejected her, chosen the empire over his own daughter. He had turned his back on her when she needed him the most. Jason seemed to sense her thoughts. He placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a quiet comfort. "I know it's hard, Zara," he said softly, "but you did the right thing. You chose to live for yourself. You didn't let anyone dictate who you should be or who you should love." Zara nodded, wiping a tear that had escaped her eye. I never thought it would end like this. I thought my father would understand. But I guess some things are never meant to be." Jason squeezed her shoulder gently. "Sometimes the hardest part is letting go. But you did it, and you're stronger for it." The ship continued its journey through the stars, and Zara felt her heart lighten with every passing moment. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was no longer bound by the expectations of her people or her father. She was free to be who she wanted to be. As the days passed, Zara and Jason found themselves growing closer. They spent their time talking, learning about each other's worlds, and sharing their hopes for the future. They were from different worlds, different species, but somehow they had found common ground. It wasn't always easy, but they made it work. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and Zara found herself falling deeper in love with him. One day, after many long hours spent navigating through space, they found a small, uninhabited planet. It was a quiet place, surrounded by lush green forests and clear blue lakes. The air was crisp and fresh, a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment of the palace they had left behind. "This could be our new home," Jason said, a hopeful look in his eyes. "A place where we can start over, where we can be ourselves." Zara looked around at the beautiful landscape, her heart swelling with emotion. This was everything she had dreamed of: peace, freedom, and the chance to build a life with Jason. She took his hand in hers, her fingers intertwining with his. "It's perfect," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "This is where we'll start our new beginning, together." Jason smiled, his face lighting up with joy. "I can't think of anything better." And so, they began their new life on the peaceful planet. They built a home, started a community, and made a life for themselves, free from the chains of the past. Zira no longer felt the weight of her father's rejection or the expectations of the alien empire. She was her own person, and with Jason by her side, she knew anything was possible. As the years went by, Zira and Jason grew old together, their bond unbreakable. They had faced the impossible and come out victorious. And in the end, it wasn't just about survival or freedom. It was about love, the kind of love that transcends boundaries, that overcomes all obstacles, and that builds something lasting and beautiful. Zira had once been a tiny, rejected princess, cast aside by her own people. But now, she was so much more. She was a woman who had fought for her own happiness, for the life she deserved, and for the man she loved. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.